Today, I'll be introducing our series on what we call emotional drivers behind illness, symptoms, or disease. I've been doing a social media series on this topic every Friday, and it's been very well received. So I plan to cover a different issue every other week here on the podcast. Please let me know what you want me to cover, and I'll make sure it gets on the list. Welcome back to the Mind Change podcast. I'm your host, Heather McKean. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and download. It really helps us to continue to create all this great content for you and others. With the Mind Change method, we operate from the belief that our body carries messages from our mind and speaks the only language that it has available, physical manifestations. The subconscious mind holds on to and stores nearly all of our experiences. Those things that are perceived as trauma get held on to even more strongly. The reason behind that is that the mind and body know that we need to process and resolve those events, or those traumas will continue to repeat. The subconscious mind does not speak the same language as the conscious mind. It speaks in metaphor, dreams, feelings, beliefs. Our body is always for us. Our main driving force at the most primal level is survival. The body is often the main messenger of our subconscious programming. A major source of disease or illness in the body is the impact of one's negative experiences on the neurotransmitter or neuromodulator production within our system. Chronic and or repeated traumatic experiences have specific impacts on the individual's neurotransmitter production. When these things happen in childhood, it basically trains our hormone output to be dysregulated. Specifically, what has been found is that dopamine is lowered by what we might experience as joy deprivation experiences. Norepinephrine is elevated by fear and or rage or repressed anger experiences. Endorphins are lowered by love deprivation or feeling neglected or having attachment wounds. Serotonin is lowered by feeling unseen, unheard, unimportant, also feelings of powerlessness or feeling stuck. Healthy body function is a continuous adaptation process to our external and internal environments. And it's operated by the brain, which in turn reflects the contents of the mind, the heart, and the gut-soul experience. Our immune system is greatly affected by the brain via neural connections, chemical reactions, neurotransmitters, lymphocytes, neurohormones, endorphins, and the like, as well as our gut. And it holds on to traumatic events, stories, or beliefs, and they have a direct impact on how well our immune system functions. Now, if this sounds new age or woo-woo, it really isn't. It's actually the oldest known way of dealing with physical health. Ancient Greek philosopher Plato said this about diseases of the body over 2,000 years ago. The quote says, "This is the reason why the cure of so many diseases is unknown to the physicians of Hellas. They are ignorant of the whole. For this is the great error of our day in the treatment of the human body, that the physicians separate the mind from the body." Hippocrates, a Greek physician who lived from about 460 BC to 375 BC, is widely known as the father of medicine. So almost 3,000 years later, medical doctors still hold his principles sacred. Summing up the Hippocratic Oath that many medical school graduates still recite today, the famous quote by Hippocrates states, "It is more important to know what sort of person has a disease than to know what sort of disease a person has. So nearly every culture since the beginning of time has identified our mental and emotional well-being as directly linked to physical well-being. The idea that disease is more than a collection of symptoms has been around since the dawn of medicine, though we have drastically strayed from this approach today. More and more people, and doctors, are seeing the value of returning back to this model of thinking. Louise Hay published her first book, Heal Your Body, in 1976. She was instrumental in not only illustrating the mind-body connection, but also in connecting various limiting beliefs to specific ailments or diseases in the body. She wasn't the first to do so, but arguably is the most well-known. Inna Segal, the author of Secret Language of Your Body, is another individual who linked specific illnesses to life events or negative feelings or emotions. These authors were instrumental in my own journey to wellness. For instance, I had long suffered from pain in my lower back. And though I had seen countless doctors, tried various forms of treatments, from steroid injections, painkillers, muscle relaxers, to yoga and Pilates, nothing seemed to work. I was told that genetics were at play, as well as lifestyle. Being a horse trainer in my earlier years and suffering numerous falls definitely provided an easy explanation to why my back always seemed to hurt. Interestingly enough, it didn't always hurt in the same way, though. Sometimes I could barely feel it, and other times I was lying on a hospital gurney writhing in pain despite every available painkiller. So if it actually was something physical, why did the symptoms change so drastically? It wasn't until I began addressing my past physical abuse that I saw the real relief from pain. Louise Hay in You Can Heal Your Life says that back pain is about support. Specifically, lower back pain can indicate fear of money and lack of financial support. Now that definitely could fit, but when I referenced Inna Segal's book, The Secret Language of Your Body, she had this to say about the pain. Feeling unsupported and alone, not knowing who or where to ask for help, feeling that the world is an unsafe place to live, trying to protect yourself from pain and hurt. That definitely resonated with me. Her book even broke it down further into the different vertebrae. And I knew that I had been diagnosed with herniations in the L4, L5 regions, so I looked those up. In the L5 description, it said, holding on to feelings of betrayal, abandonment, and isolation, difficulty trusting people and following through with plans, frequent self-sabotage, anger, and anxiety, a tendency to see yourself as a victim. These insights allowed me to hone in on some of the problem areas of my life. Obviously, I was quickly transported back to the first time I felt or believed these things and found myself back in childhood. I thought that my back was the problem. I had had MRIs and scans to show the damage, but I just wanted to feel better. My spine surgeon, who had previously operated on my neck and fused 2 of my vertebrae, which is a whole other story, said something to me during the discussions of yet another surgery planned for my spine. When discussing my particular herniations, I asked why it hurt so badly. He said that they didn't actually know. He said that much of what happens with the spine is actually still a mystery. And he said that he had scanned thousands of spines over the years and had seen people with much worse herniations than mine who actually felt no pain whatsoever. And then some with even smaller herniations who were in constant and unbearable pain. So this very well-respected and educated surgeon told me that he actually had no idea what the connection was. He said that they often do surgery just hoping to alleviate some pain, but that the outcomes are unreliable at best. That information caused me to pause and think, what if the pain had little to nothing to do with what the scans showed, but something else altogether? It wasn't until I found myself down the rabbit hole of my own mind-body healing journey that those words had come back to me. What if the pain had a message for me? Though Inna Segal and Louise Hay were pivotal in my journey of communicating with my body, I eventually moved on to even more in-depth resources. I was shocked to find so many resources that go into incredible detail about the emotional drivers behind disease and illness. Over the years, these have become valuable tools as I explore the body messages to myself and to clients. Some other helpful books that I can link for you in the show notes were a book by Carol K. Truman called Feelings Buried Alive Never Die. Also, the book The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk, who's a doctor. Also, Dr. Gabor Mate, his book When the Body Says No. Dr. John Sarno does a lot around back pain specifically, and he has a book called The Mind-Body Prescription, Healing the Body, Healing the Pain. Now, some people have reported value in something called German New Medicine. It was created by Reich Gerd Hammer. He was a German ex-physician. It also connects various symptoms or diseases to emotional drivers. Now, personally, I have found that resource very clunky to work with, and it's not something that I actually use very often. But some people have found that work helpful. I have come to see illness, disease, syndromes, symptoms, and ailments as communication. I no longer think, wait, what did I eat? What might I have? Maybe I should go to see a doctor. My first reaction now is to find out what my mind is trying to communicate to me through my body. So I've also realized that through this body communication, there's a kind of escalation chain that the body uses while speaking up. So it often starts out as a psychological awareness, such as disturbing thoughts or patterns or ruminations or feedback loops, limiting beliefs, or things that we're trying to repress. If those things are ignored, avoided, resisted, then the message moves to mild disruptions of normal functioning. That looks like fatigue or irritation reactions, maybe sleep pattern disruptions. If the situation continues to not be heeded, then it moves to more acute physical disturbances like inflammations, wounds, headaches, body aches, flus, colds, allergies, and even minor accidents. If we still don't get the message and we persist in the patterns that are causing the problem, then we move on to chronic conditions, diseases, autoimmune conditions, syndromes. Here we receive a very loud and persistent alarm. If that still isn't heard, our body often escalates to extreme measures, and sometimes that can even lead to death. Now, someone might say, okay, I see how an autoimmune syndrome might be associated with feelings, but what about a broken arm? Now, that surely can't be emotional. Am I supposed to just feel my way to the bone healing back together? So here's what I have to say about that. First of all, I have fallen off of more horses than I can count. And although I've broken many bones, I don't always break something when I fall. So is it just the way I fall? Maybe. But there's also insight into what seems like random events. Which arm did I break? The right? The left? Questions such as these hold possible clues to messages from the mind. Is it possible that I've been feeling something that I haven't been dealing with? Am I having to reevaluate my usual way of doing things because my way is no longer effective? Knowing this will not unbreak my arm, but it can aid in the healing. And it can also fortify areas of your life or belief systems that might be weak so that your arm could be strengthened. So let me give you a very practical example that came from one of my clients. And I share this in my book, but it's a good thing to talk about again. So I had a client named Martha, and Martha came to see me because she had been suffering from chronic Lyme disease. She had done all the protocols and had only gotten worse. So after hearing about my story of overcoming Lyme and many other rare conditions, she decided to reach out. As always, I received a detailed history of PNEs, which we call perceived negative experiences. And a few things caught my eye, one being that she was the oldest of multiple siblings raised by a single mother. The second one was that one of her siblings was disabled. Martha was too unwell to meet with me physically, so we agreed to meet online. Even over Skype, I noticed that Martha didn't look that sick. Other than looking a little tired, she presented as a rather put-together individual. And that's not very uncommon with autoimmune disorders. As we began to work, a fuller picture began to emerge. She was the mother of 2 young children, ages 4 and 6. Her husband was loving and supportive and had become the primary caretaker of both Martha and her children. That was a great source of shame for Martha. She had been the director of operations at a halfway house for homeless girls. And she loved her job and was very good at what she did, but she had at this point become too sick to continue. It quickly became clear to me that Martha was very hard on herself. She felt an enormous amount of guilt and shame about her illness, but felt very little hope about ever getting better. So a common emotional connection with Lyme disease is a lack of personal boundaries. As a child, she was often responsible for the care of her siblings in her mother's absence. Her mother was a nurse at a local hospital, and so she was frequently absent. Martha had 2 younger siblings, and the middle sibling suffered from cerebral palsy. Martha had expressed as her fears as a child that her brother may die in her care. And though his cerebral palsy was well managed, it was still a huge responsibility for such a young child. This was compounded by the importance she put on her mother's job. Likely to help her own guilt, her mother would often speak about the importance of her job at the hospital, sharing that the reason she was needed at the hospital was that lives were at stake. So Martha was confused by her feelings as a child because on one hand, she felt proud of her mother for saving people's lives. And on the other hand, she wished that her mother could spend more time with her and help take care of her and her siblings. She remembered feeling ashamed that she needed her mother and that she tried really hard to never complain about the burden she felt at home. Martha often received praise from her mother and other adults for how responsible she was and how hard she worked. She rarely had time to think about her own needs and viewed friends at school as immature and having trivial problems. Even when her mother started showing the signs of substance abuse, Martha made excuses for her and she rationalized her mother's behavior. The only times that Martha received any real care or attention were the few times that she had become sick. So when a case of measles took her out as a child for almost 2 weeks, her mother was then completely transformed into a doting caretaker. Martha reveled in the rare attention, and she reluctantly admitted to me during our session that it was actually one of her favorite memories. So it didn't take long for me to see that her body was trying to say with the Lyme disease that she was just hungry for approval, for care, for being taken care of. Her childhood had conditioned her to look for approval in her hard work and in her care for others. Unfortunately, that was then at the expense of her own needs. So she felt immense gratification when she worked hard and helped others. But the carefully crafted illusion would often wear thin, and she would resort to illness in her adult life so that she could take a break from the constant meeting of needs. When she had children of her own, she had to start taking ever-increasing sick days, but it still didn't allow her to the break that she desperately needed. The former attention that her husband would give her when she would get sick was now focused on the children, who seemed to still need her even if she was sick. Eventually, there were even more sick days than well days, and a friend suggested that she get tested for Lyme disease. Her mind's continued but unanswered plea for love and attention resulted in the message showing up in her body. So we worked together, and within a few sessions, Martha was able to acknowledge the pressure she felt as a child. And we were able to go back and rewrite these memories. In acknowledging and allowing the feelings of hurt and abandonment to show up in a safe place, she was able to let them go. When she did this, Martha was able to clearly see all the ways she had received love and attention in a healthy way, and then came to see that her own mother had been doing the best she could at the time. Martha also realized that her fear of something happening to her little brother, who had had cerebral palsy, had become so big that it had actually altered her perception of reality. Because in fact, her little brother actually had a rather mild case of cerebral palsy and had been a joy to be around. Her perception of the burden and the responsibility had shaped her memory to see her brother as fragile and helpless. Now, through the work that we had done, she had become free of the beliefs that she used to keep her safe as a child, and she could clearly see how strong and successful her brother was now. Rather quickly, Martha began to feel better, and she began taking time for herself and used the opportunity to love herself more genuinely. Her personal boundaries were strengthened, and she began to see her worth and value as something that just was, rather than something she had to work for or work on. Martha began to understand that her main responsibility was to continue to clean up her own head, keeping only the memories and experiences that served her, and then reframing and rewriting the rest. Not only did the Lyme disease resolve, but she began experiencing her own children in a deeper way. Her relationship with her family improved, and she eventually returned back to work at the halfway house. Now, her main goal was to provide the girls she worked with in the program with the emotional tools to address destructive thoughts, memories, patterns, and beliefs in their life. She now views any incongruency in her physical health as a loving message from her mind. So now Martha listens. I look forward to you joining us every other week as we explore a different physical issue and the common emotional drivers behind it. Please understand that the list I cover is not exhaustive, and it's also not meant to be diagnostic. I am not a medical professional, and this information is meant to be used as informational and another perspective into common physical maladies. It's quite possible that the drivers here, or the ones that I speak about for every disease, may not resonate with you. And that's fine. Again, these are just some of the most common drivers that I've experienced within myself or with my clients over the years. Also, when speaking about emotional drivers, I will often talk about a person's parents or their primary caregivers or their family dynamics or childhood environments. Now, this is never meant to place blame on our upbringings. While it's true that we're undeniably influenced and programmed in our formative years, primarily ages 0 to 11, placing blame is rarely helpful in the healing process. Remember, it's not the person that was the problem, but the programming that resulted. Change the programming, you change the problem. If we will only heal when someone from our past changes or apologize or even dies, most of us will stay sick. Another important note is that the emotional drivers in infants and children are often very different than the emotional drivers in adults. In this series, I will only be covering adult emotional drivers. So please know that these will rarely apply in the case of young children and infants. All right. That about covers our introduction into emotional drivers. I look forward to seeing you every other week to dive into this fascinating topic. Please make sure to leave those 5-star reviews and comment if there's a disease, a symptom, or an ailment you would like to hear covered. Until next time, thanks so much for joining us on the Mind Change podcast, where we are changing the world one mind at a time.